Hello and welcome to PFF Wire. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Brad Spielberger. Brad, how are you doing today?
Another beautiful Thursday night football game. We actually got a couple touchdowns this time. I know we went about 100 minutes without a touchdown on Thursday night football, but we got two of them in this game, so we a real treat.
Yeah, I was almost kind of secretly hoping that we wouldn't have another touchdown in this game, but then the beginning of the game, the first half was so deathly boring. I was like, we need some sort of excitement. And not to get too deep into that game quite yet, because we will be talking about a little bit more coming up here, but I mean, the end of the game was so abrupt that it was like there was suddenly a lot of excitement, and then it was just over. Like I don't know. As a Bears fan like you are, that must have been even more brutal. But yeah, it was just a very bizarre last 2 minutes of that game.
No, it's true. It's true. After a lot of inaction and punts from their own 40-yard line, all of a sudden it was kind of some excitement. That's a typical Bears experience, frankly. But yeah.
It really is. All right, let's kick it off with our first segment here, fresh off the wire. And yeah, we will touch on that game for a second here because I thought that Ron Rivera's, emotion at the end of the game, that he was asked about the report that came out yesterday from ESPN, from Seth Wickersham, Don Van Natta, that it wasn't Ron Rivera who picked Carson Wentz. It was instead Daniel Snyder who picked Carson Wentz. Ron Rivera was asked about that. And, swore, became emotional, said that he was the one who was looking through all the papers, looking through all the analytics, watching Carson Wentz, and that it was his decision to pick Carson Wentz, and then he stormed off the podium. So, I don't know. It was just a weird week for the Commanders in general, where you have early in the week Ron Rivera saying, he was asked why the Commanders haven't had the same success as other NFC East teams. He simply said quarterback. Didn't really expound on that much until later. And then to have this come out that, the report that he wasn't the one who picked Carson Wentz, he fought against that. I don't know. I would say that overall, from looking at a lot of tweets from last night, from, the video that got posted of him having that emotional reaction to the question and just tweets about that in general, Commanders fan base is not really overly supportive of what's going on there right now in general. And that includes Ron Rivera. So they didn't really seem all that receptive to it. But I don't know. My overall reaction to it is just that weird week in Washington. And I'm not sure how much you can really trust about anything that's going on there right now.
Yeah, rare, weird week in Washington, right? I think Rivera is usually a very stoic guy, so it did stick out. But frankly, I think it's an overcorrection too. He basically, after saying the quarterback answer, now is trying to not only, draw that back in, but really to overcompensate for it and say, no, this is my guy and I stand up for him and yada, yada. I will say this, things tend to get out of certain buildings more than others. It's been known for years that Dan Snyder puts his finger on the scale when he wants to take players. It was rumored that Dwayne Haskins was not really a guy the front office was super excited about, but that Dan Snyder loved him and wanted the team to draft him. Obviously, not trying to get into any component of that besides just that little tidbit, but it is interesting for Rivera to kind of freak out about that after Wentz didn't really play particularly well at all in that game. Was battling some injuries, had the shoulder, was shaking his hand after he hit a Bears defender's hand on his own follow-through. But hey, at least they came out of there with a W in a very ugly game.
I did think it was kind of funny that Ron Rivera referred to Carson Wentz as, that young man doesn't always have to hear about this, the young man in this locker room. Yeah, I mean, I guess Carson Wentz is a young man. He's 29 years old, though. He's been in the NFL for quite a long time. And I don't know. I mean, he's had certainly an up and down career, and you do feel bad when players get picked on a little bit too much. At the same time, he is a NFL quarterback, and he's nearly 30 years old. On the Bears side, some more struggles from Justin Fields. Not maybe to the same degree that there was in previous games. I think that he is improving. He ripped off the long run there at the end, which I thought was really good because he wasn't always the most natural runner at Ohio State. I know that he's got great speed, great athleticism, great size, but I thought that the vision at times was kind of lacking for him in college and maybe even through the first year of his career. I thought that long run was a big positive from that game. At the same time, I was, talking to people around the league throughout the game and notably about Justin Fields. And one person was saying that, seeing a lot of late throws, seeing some inaccuracy, and you would have liked some of that stuff to get corrected at this point. Obviously, it will certainly help when Justin Fields has a better supporting cast around him. You just hope that he can get to that point where he actually has the better supporting cast around him in Chicago, and that the coaching staff and GM and everyone doesn't give up on him before that point.
That's unfortunate because, look, we're not trying to just make a bunch of excuses for the guy, but when you hear footsteps, whether you're getting pressured, which, look, they're getting pressured more than any other team on a per drop back basis. Well, even when you're not getting pressured, you probably think you are because you're assuming after a certain amount of time there's going to be a guy in your lap, and it's probably a fair assumption. At the same time, you're also not getting any separation from most of your wide receivers. I do think he had Darnell Mooney NFL open on a throw. They ended up taking a sack. We did credit him with 3 of those 5 sacks on him. Again, the offensive line did not play well, allowed a ton of pressures, a 40% pressure rate allowed, which continues to be the worst in the NFL per our charting. But yeah, I do think you saw why it's so hard to quit him. I mean, that corner of the end zone, big time throw, a touchdown pass to Dante Pettis was as good of a throw as you could possibly make. Not only a touchdown, but lead the receiver away from the DB, right in the corner of the end zone by the pylon, away from the coverage. Just a perfect throw. I mean, you mentioned the running. He did take one big hit near the goal line early in the game, but I think the biggest thing for him too is he has gotten better at either getting out of bounds or sliding. He had a beautiful slide, kind of, perfect little baseball into second base type of slide. And I think all that stuff matters because he said in his press conference afterwards that his shoulder is really hurt or it's really hurting him right now. He took a lot of shots yesterday and he's going to continue to, unfortunately, but there was some positive you can take away from it. At the end of the day, you do start to question not only the personnel, but also a little bit of the decision-making from the play caller. Even at the end of the game, why are you in empty sets after you've been running the ball with Khalil Herbert and David Montgomery? I do think they were out of timeouts, but still you had some time left on the clock, and you're going empty and just throwing, corner fades to Darnell Mooney, which he probably should have caught, but long answer short, I just don't know. I think everyone is partly to blame in Chicago, which is, a bad place to be considering their lack of talent.
Yeah, even the play call at the end there to have Darnell Mooney run that whip route short of the goal line, and maybe that's Mooney, maybe it's the play calling, but you'd like to have a little bit of a deeper route there to ensure that if that play is made, if he catches the ball, that he's definitely in for a touchdown, which, I mean, even if he had made that catch, it would have been very questionable there. After the game, Ryan Fitzpatrick took some heat, somewhat deserved, by saying during the Amazon broadcast, Justin Fields needs to look in the mirror and say, what am I? You are not Peyton Manning. You're not Patrick Mahomes. You're not a pocket passer. You're a Cam Newton type. You're a guy who's an elite runner of the football. That conversation was actually much more nuanced than that direct quote gives that was tweeted out. But at the same time, I've never loved the Cam Newton, Justin Fields comparisons in general. First of all, Cam Newton, obviously to this point, was a much better NFL player than Justin Fields is right now. But I would also say that Cam Newton was always a more natural runner than Justin Fields was. And Justin Fields actually in college was a much more accurate passer with probably a more natural thrower, at least in college, than Cam Newton was. So I don't love that comparison, but I also don't think the answer here for Chicago is for Justin Fields to try to become Cam Newton and try to run more. I think the answer is for him to develop more as a pocket passer.
I think it's funny because we've kind of conflated now a scrambler and a runner. Like Cam Newton, Jalen Hurts, even Josh Allen, they're runners where they're actually designing runs for them. Patrick Mahomes, if you just looked at when he uses his legs, you could call him the best running quarterback or one of them in the NFL, but it's because on scrambles, when teams are playing too high and dropping 8 guys into coverage, yeah, he scrambles for 10 yards. But the guy waddles, you're never going to call zone read that often with Patrick Mahomes. He just is elusive enough to scramble. And I think that is more Justin Fields. I agree with you. I also would say the one thing that I think worked yesterday was moving the pocket. And that, whether it's partly just his skill set, being able to throw, moving both directions, but also with how bad the offensive line is, I think that's more the pocket passing. I'm sure he doesn't want to sit back on 7-step drops either, or 5-step drops, but I think they did a good job a little bit yesterday of moving the pocket to his right and to his left, kind of half-field reads, cutting the field in half, and there was some success there. It's just, I guess it's kind of, you can't get away with the gimmicky stuff for an entire game. Eventually, it's going to catch up to you. Also, when you're 0 for 11 in the red zone, or in goal to go, that'll catch up to you as well.
Definitely. We've got some news around the NFL, backup quarterbacks starting around the league. I think we already talked about Cooper Rush expected to start for the Dallas Cowboys. That's despite the fact that Dak Prescott is listed as questionable this week. But also PJ Walker, will be starting in Carolina. Sounds like it's possible that Baker Mayfield could actually dress for this game, but he's listed as doubtful. And then also Andy Dalton will continue to start for the New Orleans Saints. Curious situation in Carolina that Baker Mayfield would be healthy enough to dress, but not to start in this game. I would think that, if the high ankle sprain is enough to keep him out from starting, that you probably prefer to just have Jacob Eason there as the backup.
Yeah, it is a strange situation where there was almost apparently toying with the idea of IR. Then it did become from Jeremy Fowler to ESPN. Look, he's not going to go on IR because they think he'll be back within 4 weeks. And now we're at, he could play. My guess, again, I think it's a little bit less severe than a Mac Jones. But again, Mac Jones could have played the week after he got hurt. No, we can't. We know that. It's a nice gamesmanship. The opponent has to prepare for him. I think it's probably the same situation here. But I guess, like you said, you should have somebody else available, called up from the practice squad or dressed or whatever, in case PJ Walker does go down in that game.
And what do you think about, Andy Dalton's going to be starting here against his former team, the Cincinnati Bengals. What have you thought, I guess, of Andy Dalton's performances so far in that kind of starting role there for New Orleans?
Yeah, I actually think he's been pretty solid. I do think Minnesota and Seattle. Seattle, I think, is one of the worst defenses in the NFL. Definitely. I think Minnesota is comfortably a bottom half of the NFL defense, frankly. They have some talent there, but as we know, defense is a weak link proposition, and they're just not great on the back end. And then their pass rush is okay, but, if Zadarius Smith, who's missed a game, I want to say Danielle Hunter is a good player, but maybe not the guy we kind of know him as he used to be. Dalton's been solid, but I think it is interesting and notable that last week, Saints were still -5.5 in that game against Seattle. Now in New Orleans again, Cincinnati is favored in this game with a short week too, coming off of that Sunday Night Football game against the Baltimore Ravens. So, I think that is notable. It's interesting because there's some injuries on Cincinnati's side as well. Yep. But I think the fact there's a full touchdown swing is probably pretty telling in what Vegas thinks about those two teams.
For sure. Andy Dalton does have a 80.3 overall PFF grade so far this season, 80.1 passing grade. So yeah, he's definitely been solid. Jameis Winston in 3 games had a 65.3 overall PFF grade. There's something going on with Cam Akers in Los Angeles with the Rams. I'm not sure if we want to speculate too much on this because it's listed as a personal issue. It will keep him out of Sunday's game against, who are the Rams playing this week? They are playing the Carolina Panthers. But Sean McVay said that it's something that the team will have to work through. He stressed that they really want to keep it in-house. So once again, you don't want to speculate too much, but he was asked if, Cam Akers will remain on the team moving forward. And he kind of continued to say that there's things that they're trying to work through there. I would say that obviously, given this situation, it's possible that he could be off the team. There could be some sort of trade or release, something like that. I don't know any other news about the situation, but just gauging from what Sean McVay has said. But I would say that one player to watch in this situation for the Los Angeles Rams is rookie running back Kyren Williams. He unfortunately got hurt in week 1 on a kickoff before he was able to actually even take the field. But there's been a lot of buzz that he could actually have a pretty solid role on offense once he is able to get healthy. It was a high ankle sprain for him. I believe they suffered on that kickoff. But, if something does transpire with Cam Akers, then you'd probably see Kyren Williams and Darrell Henderson splitting those reps at running back once Kyren Williams is healthy. So if you're in a deeper league, if you're looking for running back help in fantasy, I know that I picked up Kyren Williams today in a 12-team league and immediately stashed him on IR, but I would say that that's probably a decent idea for anyone out there.
Yeah, no, it's certainly notable. Like you said, it was actually the opening kickoff of the entire NFL season against the Buffalo Bills, and was described as a 6 to 8 week injury. So we're kind of getting into that zone. Speaking of Cam Akers, maybe they're not trying to rush back another running back from an injury early because, since he's gotten back from that Achilles injury in the playoffs last year, he was remarkably inefficient. Obviously, it was a miracle that he was even playing 5 months removed from tearing his Achilles, but the lack of explosiveness, the lack of efficiency has been there. And I wonder if maybe his frustration also comes from a usage standpoint. The Rams historically with Sean McVay like to kind of lean on one running back and play that guy a ton. It's been much more of a committee now. And yes, once Kyren Williams is back, I know a lot of analysts, or draft analysts, I should say, loved his pass blocking prowess. And knowing the Rams and their inability to pass block right now, that alone could get him in a lot of games. Even if he's not getting touches, he's just taking care of Matthew Stafford. So certainly a name to keep an eye on, no question.
Before we get a little bit deeper into last night's Commanders-Bears game, take a quick break here. PFF Wire is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow, Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. All right, let's give it one up and one down from last night's Commanders-Bears game. I'll start off with one up, and that's Commanders edge defender Montez Sweat. He had 8 total pressures last night against the Bears. That was a career high. I believe he also had 6 overall defensive stops. He's always been a good player, but he's really ascending this year even more. He's the 6th highest graded edge defender, 2nd highest graded run defending edge defender, and he has the 6th highest stop rate. So big ups to Montez Sweat. He was very solid last night against the Bears. Who's your one up from last night?
Yeah, it's got to be Bears second-round rookie cornerback Kyler Gordon out of your Washington Huskies. Look, he had a very tough start to the year. I highlighted on the show. I talked about maybe looking at Curtis Samuel's over 4.5 receptions. Apologies for those who maybe tailed me there. But he played a large role in that not hitting. He had an 80 coverage grade last night, the best of his young career so far. He now has back-to-back games with over 70 overall grades. And then not only in coverage, he allowed, I want to say, 3 receptions for 13 total yards, had a forced incompletion. We also had 5 tackles, including 3 stops, which you mentioned, which, by the way, for folks, is basically a non-successful play. So not, you don't stay ahead of the chains on first down. If it's a 2-yard gain, it's not a tackle for loss or no gain, but it's a stop because it's not a successful offensive play. So really, really, really good game from him. It was one of those where even on the broadcast angle, actually, I guess shout out Amazon Prime, and they're all 22. You could tell he was playing really well and bothering the offense. The grade, I thought, matched the eye test there for sure. So a young, ascending, trending up player, no question.
For my down guy that you just mentioned, Curtis Samuel, he might have actually hit the over on some of those things if he had been playing better. He had 2 drops on 4 targets and just 6 yards. And he was coming off a very productive early part of his second season with the Commanders. Last year was pretty much a disaster for him in Washington. He was hurt the whole time. He was really struggling to get back on the field and get healthy. And I don't think that hopes were very high for him, at least with the fan base and around fantasy and everything coming into this year. But like I said, he had a really solid start to the season, but those 2 drops really killed him. Only had 2 catches, like I mentioned, on 4 targets. So who was your down in this game?
Yeah, so it's the entire Bears defensive line. And I think also, highlighting Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker, their young second-round safety, and their entire coverage unit. Jalen Johnson came back and played in that game. I need to give a shout-out to Kendall Vildor as well, their other outside corner. Eddie Jackson looks like Eddie Jackson again. But I think I'm saying the entire secondary because this defensive line right now for us is the worst team in pass rush win rate by almost 10 percentage points, which, folks, is bananas. Like, it's like you don't see that in any season. That's how bad they are right now. They had 7 pressures last night. Yes, Washington didn't drop back a ton, but that is the fewest pressures allowed by Washington by a significant margin. And you might remember the sacks. Well, yes, Roquan Smith, the linebacker, had a sack, and Jaquan Brisker, the safety, had a sack. So it wasn't with the defensive line doing any of that. They're just not generating a pass rush at all. And the fact that Chicago has really stayed in almost every game from a defensive standpoint, given their lack of pass rush, is really impressive.
We do have a comment in here from Eek. Brian Robinson is not up. Gunshot victim and decent first career start. Definitely honorable mention to Brian Robinson. He was great in that start. Got a ton of carries, and I think that he's definitely going to be an ascending player there for Washington. At the same time, Ron Rivera said today that he wants to continue to get Antonio Gibson more snaps as well because he looked pretty explosive when he was on the field as well. So, but definitely shout out to Brian Robinson. Incredible story for him to be able to come back the way that he has early this season. All right, let's go game by game, give out some fantasy news and notes. We will start off with the Buccaneers Steelers game. Buccaneers on BetMGM favored by 8.5 points. The point total is 45. Chris Godwin, Buccaneers wide receiver, good to go in this one. Julio Jones, Buccaneers wide receiver, is doubtful. Steelers tight end Pat Freiermuth is out with a concussion. And then also that Steelers secondary, extremely banged up right now. Safety Minkah Fitzpatrick and cornerbacks Cam Sutton, Ahkello Witherspoon, and Levi Wallace all out. So it's obviously good that Chris Godwin's good to go. Mike Evans obviously will be playing in this one as well, Russell Gage. But I'd say that given the news about the Steelers secondary, if you have any questions about whether to play any of those Buccaneers, Tom Brady, or any of those wide receivers, might be a good idea to get them in your fantasy lineups or in daily fantasy.
Steelers traditionally don't spend a ton in the secondary. Obviously, Minkah Fitzpatrick, one of the highest paid safeties, but they skimp at corner because they're able to generate such a pass rush with their front four. But without TJ Watt playing, we're talking about they're starting both outside corners and slot corner. And Cam Sutton is a difference-making player in the slot for them. I know he's played a little bit of both, but can tackle, can make plays in space, a very good corner, and then of course the other two guys on the outside. So I think Tom Brady and that team it's a get-right game. I've probably been saying that for too many weeks in a row. Atlanta was also a get-right game, but this defense, give up 38 points to Buffalo, and now literally does not have their secondary playing in this matchup. I think it could get ugly in Pittsburgh.
I know that I did one of those underdog, weekly draft things or whatever, and I made sure to stack Mike Evans and Tom Brady. So you can steal my idea out for anyone out there. All right, Bengals, Saints. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins questionable with an ankle injury. Saints are really banged up. Wide receiver Jarvis Landry out. Wide receiver Michael Thomas out. Jameis Winston won't be starting. Wide receiver Chris Olave questionable with a concussion. And then also just a defensive note on there, Saints cornerback Marshawn Lattimore out. So if T. Higgins does play, the Saints secondary could certainly be tested with all of the Bengals offensive playmakers. And that Saints secondary really struggled last week against the Seahawks offense. And obviously Geno Smith has been great so far this season, but they made Geno Smith look like he was like a top 10 quarterback of all time last week.
And honestly, outside of Cam Jordan, they just have not been able to generate much of a pass rush at all. He looked good in that game and has looked good this season. Marcus Davenport in a big contract year hasn't been terrible, but I think he wants to play at a level we've seen the past couple of years when healthy, where he's a 80+ pass rush grade guy for us and is consistently generating pressure. I haven't really seen that this season. I think Lattimore is out is obviously huge, one of the highest paid corners in the NFL. But I think the thing there is they probably were considering just putting him on T. Higgins, not Jamar Chase, what a lot of teams are doing this season, and then just doubling and bracketing Jamar Chase with two players. Now you can't do that. And so they do have some depth there. Bradley Roby, obviously a good player that's, came back for them this season, can play inside and outside. Their young rookie, Alante Taylor, PJ Williams. They have depth at the corner spot, but Paulson Adebo has regressed this season on the outside. And if you can't get a pass rush besides Cam Jordan, obviously that's how you beat this Bengals team is, getting in Burrow's face. But it could be another long afternoon for that defense.
Absolutely. Jaguars, Colts next up here. I didn't give the line on the Bengals are favored by 2 points, and the point total is 43. For Jaguars, Colts, the Colts are favored by 2 points. Point total is 42. And then you've got Jaguars wide receivers Zay Jones and Marvin Jones, both questionable. Colts injury report just came out while we were speaking. Jonathan Taylor, questionable with the ankle injury, and Nyheim Hines questionable with a concussion. Nyheim Hines was a full participant in practice today. Colts head coach Frank Reich said that Jonathan Taylor has a chance to play this week. He had about 10 days off between last Thursday's game and now. So I know that he wanted to play last week. We'll see if they grant him his wish in this game, but certainly positive that Nyheim Hines was able to get in a full practice before this game.
Yeah, I believe Nyheim Hines should be good to go in this game. Like you said, they had the extended rest, the mini bye week. Unfortunate because he had the big role, expected last week without Jonathan Taylor, and had that concussion or something adjacent to a concussion very early in that contest. And it became, Deion Jackson, some other guys trying to, run the football for the Colts. So this game's probably going to be pretty ugly. I don't think it's going to be the most exciting game of the weekend because, frankly, this Colts defense does look good. I think Stephon Gilmore, maybe you should have signed somewhere else, but is playing like a Stephon Gilmore and has been an impact player for them. DeForest Buckner back healthy now, coming on a little bit. Him and Grover Stewart on the interior should be a good matchup, with Brandon Sheriff and those guys they brought into Jacksonville. But, yeah, I mean – Indianapolis's offense, I'm not sure it matters much, who's playing for them right now. They are struggling to do anything on that offense, which is crazy considering how much they've spent on that offensive line.
Definitely. Patriots at Browns next. Browns favored by 2.5 points. Point total is 43. You've got Nelson Aguilar and Jacoby Myers, both Patriots wide receivers, questionable. Patriots running back Damian Harris, questionable. Patriots tight end Jonnu Smith, questionable. Patriots quarterback Mac Jones, questionable. And Browns cornerback Joe Hayden and defensive end Jadeveon Clowney, both out. For this one, I think the real players to watch are Aguilar, Harris, Mac Jones, and Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith did not play last week. Damian Harris dealing with a hamstring injury. Nelson Aguilar did not finish last week's game with a hamstring injury. And Mac Jones obviously now has not played for 2 weeks. The Mac Jones situation is certainly interesting in general because, as we kind of mentioned on Wednesday's show, Bill Belichick is not confirming that Mac Jones is going to start even when he's fully healthy and ready to play. Reached out to some people about that this week. And, one person, I basically asked, is this real? Is it really possible that Mac Jones wouldn't play when he's fully healthy? And essentially what I heard back is even if it's not true, even if that's not real, it's probably best for Mac Jones to think that way just because competition is always a good thing. So I'm not sure so much that the Patriots are playing mind games with the Browns by saying or really any of the Patriots' upcoming opponents about Mac Jones' health. It might just be kind of a way to push Mac Jones a little bit more since to begin the season, he did not look as good as he did as a rookie.
No doubt about it. I mean, they obviously want to motivate everyone in that building. Also, you got your wires crossed a little bit. Joe Hayden retired a Brown today.
Oh, God.
Denzel Ward.
Denzel Ward.
Their current top cornerback, their first-round pick corner of this generation, out along with Jadeveon Clowney. I did take the Cleveland Browns -2.5. I mentioned that on the PFF forecast. I thought Jadeveon Clowney was going to play in that game. He practiced early in the week. And obviously something must have, kind of gone the wrong direction. I still kind of like it. And also Denzel Ward. Yes, you always want your lockdown number one corner, but do you really need that against a Patriots team that doesn't have, a true alpha number one receiver? I think there's still a lot of depth in that Cleveland secondary, and they can compensate for that. So, a lot of injuries here. Obviously, Jacoby Brissett, familiar, with Bill Belichick and vice versa, which would be an interesting undertone and storyline. But I like Cleveland in this game. They are top 5 right now in EPA per play, the best rushing offense in the NFL. And the Patriots are actually, I want to say, 13th worst right now in defending the run on an EPA per play standpoint. So I still like Cleveland in a low scoring, probably a grueling rushing attack for both teams. I think Cleveland wins that matchup.
To be fair, Joe Hayden also is not playing in this game. So
was he questionable? He's doubtful. He's doubtful.
About that. Yeah, I'd say he was doubtful. One other note, just while we are talking about that, Browns have been absolutely abhorrent against the run. So Ramondre Stevenson, a good fantasy play, especially since I think the expectation is that Damian Harris won't be playing in this game. And the Patriots at this point will only have 2 rookies behind Ramondre Stevenson. That's Kevin Harris and Pierre Strong. So if Damian Harris does not play this week, Ramondre Stevenson might basically be like an every down back. And he was very good last week against the Detroit Lions. And the Lions and the Browns are both bottom 2 in EPA per run play against. So very good matchup for him again this week. Not many injuries in the Jets-Packers game, at least as it relates to fantasy. The Packers are favored by 7.5 points. The point total is 45. Christian Watson, the Packers wide receiver, is out. I know that Rashawn Gary is also questionable to play in this game.
Yep, saw that, and head coach Matt LaFleur said he's concerned about Gary, which is obviously, a potentially massive loss. I think he's a top 5, maybe top 10 edge defender or honestly defensive player in the entire NFL right now, the way he's playing. Christian Watson, too, I wanted to point this out, found interesting. Head coach Matt LaFleur, again, said they might actually just put him on the shelf for an extended period of time. He's been dealing with hamstring during the entire offseason. He basically didn't participate in training camp. has been out for a long time. Obviously the deep speedster and brings, they run him on jet sweeps a couple times a game and all this, kind of trickeration with him, but just has not been able to get healthy. They might put him on the shelf for a little while and just let him get fully 100% for the stretch run.
Definitely. Next up is Ravens at New York Giants. Ravens favored by 6 points. Point total is 45. No one surprises me, maybe a little bit, just because the Giants have been better than a lot of people have expected. But Ravens wide receiver Rashad Bateman out. Ravens running back Justice Hill doubtful. And then on the Giants side, you've still got wide receivers Kenny Galladay and Kadarius Toney out. Wide receiver Wan'Dale Robinson questionable. So that's obviously a little bit better than it has been over the last few weeks. Giants running back Saquon Barkley good to go in this game. And then on the Ravens side, on the defense, Justin Houston out. I'd say that it would be really cool if Wan'Dale Robinson could get back on the field. He has not played since week 1, but that does seem like it's kind of a 50-50 shot at this point.
Yeah, that being said, I still think 6 points is too many here, and I think Baltimore probably wins the game, but I like the Giants catching almost a full touchdown at home here for a couple of reasons, namely Wink Martindale, the Giants defensive coordinator. They actually both shouted each other out in press conferences this week, him and Lamar Jackson. But, no one knows Lamar Jackson from practice and all that better than him. Obviously saw him in Baltimore and probably tried to figure out ways to contain him or, think of ways that defenses would try to contain Lamar Jackson when the team ultimately played them. So, I think that will be very interesting in that matchup. And then, Darius Slayton played some inspired football in that London game. Finally got on the field. Has a bunch of incentives in his contract, which was, the value is brought down to keep him on the roster. And he looked like the guy that he can be at times. So, again, I think Baltimore probably gets the win, but coming off a big divisional game, a tight game, they barely won by 2 points. I just think 6 points is probably too many.
Yeah, it was an interesting situation this offseason with Wink Martindale. I guess he was fired by the Ravens. And so far this season, the Giants defense actually ranks better in EPA per play against. They're 15th. The Ravens are 20th. Obviously not a major difference there, but I would say that just based on the eye test, the Giants defense has been a little bit better this season. Let's move on to Vikings against the Dolphins. Vikings only favored by 3.5 points in this game. It's in Miami. Point total is 46. On the Vikings side, Alexander Mattison limited with a shoulder injury. And for the Dolphins, Teddy Bridgewater is not expected to start. It's expected to be Skylar Thompson in this game. I don't think their injury report has come out yet for today, but as of Thursday, Bridgewater was limited. Raheem Mostert, the Dolphins running back, was limited. Tua Tagovailoa was limited. Tyreek Hill was a full participant, and Jalen Waddle was a full participant. But I don't know. I mean, with Skylar Thompson, I know that we both were kind of impressed by what he did last week against the Jets, despite the fact that the Jets kind of blew out the Dolphins. But Vikings only favored by 3.5 points against a third-string, seventh-round rookie quarterback, and the point total being as high as I'm not sure if I'm missing something here.
I thought the same way when the Lions were only 2.5 point favorites headed to New England to play Bailey Zappi, and they lost 29-0. So, all jokes aside, I do kind of agree with you, but I think we talked about this on Monday that Skylar Thompson didn't look over his head. I mean, I think he managed well enough for a guy coming into a game. And I think, both Hill and Waddle being back is huge. Look, Minnesota is going to play two high shell almost every single snap, and those guys can run some crossing routes and mesh concepts and a bunch of stuff over the middle. And if they get the ball and get moving in space, can obviously break off a big gain at any moment in time. And like I mentioned, I don't love Minnesota's defense a ton this year. I think, linebacker Eric Kendrick's a good player. They're getting rookie Brian Asamoah more involved, but, a tough position to come along with. And then, at corner, just not super talented there. So I think it's one of those where explosive plays can maybe dictate how it goes. And then again, Minnesota is 4-1, but I'm not sure any of those. Maybe you get the first week 1 against Green Bay, but not a very impressive 4-1, on a game by game basis, really.
Yeah, for sure. They beat the Packers, Lions, Saints, and Bears, and they lost handily to the Philadelphia Eagles. That was one of those Monday night games, I think. All right, next up, 49ers favored by 5.5 points at the Atlanta Falcons. Point total is 44.5. The big injury here is Falcons tight end Kyle Pitts. Questionable. I believe that he said this week, though, that he expects to play. So that would definitely be good for the Falcons, possibly good for fantasy managers, even though Kyle Pitts has been a little bit disappointing so far this season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I don't think you peg the Niners defense as a spot where you're going to get right and maybe,
Sure.
get back on track for the season. They did lose Emmanuel Mosley to a torn ACL. Unfortunately, he had been playing very good football for the 49ers. But they have, Fred Warner, who could probably play a lot against Kyle Pitts in the slot. They have Talanoa Hufanga, who's this breakout, kind of stud safety for them.
Sure.
Jimmy Ward, I think, broke his hand, but is expected to play with a club. But another good safety that probably can get some reps against Kyle Pitts. So I don't think it's a good matchup. I know in fantasy, so far this season, this is a very small sample. I kind of don't like these, but they've given up the second fewest points to tight ends in fantasy so far this season. I think, again, like I said, that's my favorite thing, but still a notable, kind of stat. So hopefully plays would obviously be huge for Atlanta. I think Atlanta has done a great job in scheming their players open and getting guys the ball in space. But yeah, a tough defense to try to get right against.
Yeah, a lot of that fantasy points against obviously can be touchdown dependent, but they've got good red zone defense. You can keep tight ends out of the end zone, and obviously that's a good thing. Not a ton of notable injuries other than the ones that we've already mentioned. In the Panthers-Rams game, Rams favored by 10 points at home. Point total only 42. Baker Mayfield doubtful. Panthers wide receiver Laviska Shenault out. Then you've got Rams running back Cam Akers, as we previously mentioned, out with a personal matter. And then Rams tight end Tyler Higbee and wide receiver Cooper Kupp, both questionable but expected to play in this game. So PJ Walker going to Los Angeles as a starter. Rams only favored by 10 points. I think this kind of tells you how much the Rams have struggled so far this season. That offensive line, incredibly banged up. Allen Robinson hasn't got a lot going at wide receiver. They've had issues running the football. If there's a get-right game for the Rams, and this looks like it would be the one.
You'd certainly think so, but with Carolina's pass rush, they could at least give Matthew Stafford some issues. With Brian Burns and Derek Brown in the interior, and we talked about this pre-show, but right now we have the Rams. They are bottom 5 in EPA per play on offense and bottom 5 in explosive plays. So they're not even also some teams can be inefficient, but they can break off some big gains. The entire Rams offense is 2-yard carries by Darrell Henderson and then 7-yard catches by Cooper Kupp. That's their entire offense. So and Tyler Higbee, give him some credit. He's been solid so far this year. But yeah, so I hear you, and it is telling they're only favored that much, but it opened at 9.5. It moved to 11. I bet it at 11. I thought that was just too many points for Carolina. New head coach and all those things, kind of a narrative bet. But I just think it's going to be an ugly, low-scoring game. We joke the Rams have scored fewer points than the Bears this season. The Bears only added 7 to that total last night, so the Rams can charge ahead. But I think it's more about the fact that the Rams could win, but can they cover over 10 points? Maybe a different conversation.
Yeah, J.C. Horn, the Panthers cornerback, expected to sit out in this game. But no, I mean, Carolina does have a solid defense overall, and we'll see if, moving on to Steve Wilkes this week, if that kind of, adds a little bounce in the Panthers' steps. Next up, we've got Cardinals at Seattle. Cardinals favored by 2.5 points. Point total is 50.5. And Cardinals running backs James Conner and Darrell Williams both out in this game. So you're looking at Benjamin, rookie Keontae Ingram, as far as running backs go for the Cardinals. They also picked up Corey Clement and Tyson Williams to put on the practice squad. So probably a good chance that we see one of those guys in this game. You know what? I did look at the line in this game. I'm not sure if it moved since both those running backs were actually ruled out, but that's another one that does surprise me maybe a little bit. I mean, the Cardinals have not been fantastic this season. Favored by 2.5 points in Seattle with the way that Geno Smith has played. I know Seattle's defense has been terrible so far this season, but I don't know, I might be leaning towards the Seahawks a little bit more in that game.
I'm sorry to keep going against you. It's interesting because I'll tell you, George agrees with you, and we talked about this again on Sunday on the forecast. But it's actually PFF Greenline's biggest edge of any spread of the week is Arizona minus 2.5 here.
Fascinating.
I think, yes, no, 100%. And I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but where I thought Seattle catching 5.5 points against New Orleans made no sense to me. Yeah. Granted, they could have covered, they didn't. They lost by a touchdown, but they could have. But Taysom Hill just absolutely gashed them and basically single-handedly beat them last week. So, also we talked about this earlier too. Arizona is 11th in EPA per play right now, but dead last in explosive play rate. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, those stats kind of mirror each other. It's not a perfect correlation, but if you're efficient, you're going to get some explosives. You're going to have guys break off some big gains. And then lastly, for Benjamin, Cliff Kingsbury is a fan of his. I don't know.
Yeah.
Last week before the guys got hurt, he was getting a healthy amount of touches. They were throwing him the football on screens. They were getting him carries. He does great well for us as a rusher, okay as a receiver, but may only be a 1 week stream thing. I don't think he'll maintain a large role once the guys are healthy and ahead of him. But I think he could have a sizable role and maybe win you a week if you need a streamer running back, this week in fantasy football.
Yeah, definitely. He's like you said, Cliff Kingsbury definitely seems like he likes him, and there's not a lot of viable options really behind him on that Cardinals roster right now, with two guys that they basically just signed who could actually play sizable roles in this game. Next, we've got the Bills at KC. Bills favored over the Chiefs by 2.5 points. Point total in this game is 54. Both teams are mostly healthy. On the Bills side, tight end Dawson Knox and wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie, both good to go. The Bills are a wagon. They're probably the best team in the NFL. I'd be pretty scared to bet against the Chiefs in Kansas City in this game.
Absolutely. I want to say Patrick Mahomes is 7-1 as an underdog in his career. Not surprising. Honestly, the most surprising thing might be that he's been an underdog 8 times in his career at this point. I'm guessing like half of those were 2018, the first couple weeks of the season before we knew what we were dealing with. But, another interesting thing, sometimes fantasy is as simple as this. Look, folks, there are 2 spreads that are at above 46, 2 totals, that are above 46 in the entire week. It's Seattle, Arizona, we just talked about, and then 54 here for Kansas City, Buffalo. So sometimes just taking guys that are playing in games that are expected to be much higher scoring, it's a full touchdown above every other game on the slate. Certainly interesting. I think maybe a guy like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling is kind of one of those waiver wire guys that's always available. I thought he looked good last week. He did, score about 9.5 points in half PPR, but starting to get more involved in the offense. They're looking his way, I think, more often and earlier in the progression. But yes, it's my Super Bowl rematch, my adjusted Super Bowl rematch for this. I cannot wait for this game. I can't believe I could be wrong. It's not prime time. I think it would be an afternoon game,
it's
but
the 4:25, I think, yeah.
Which I guess is like semi prime time. But I cannot believe. But anyway, this is going to be one of the games of the year. Cannot wait for this one.
Curious to see how many touchdowns Gabe Davis can have in this one, because he had 4 the last time these two teams went against each other, and he had a monster game last week as well. He's been a fun ascending player in the NFL. All right, the Sunday night game is Dallas Cowboys against the Philadelphia Eagles. I think you can slot this one in as a Sunday night game every single year, pretty much. The Eagles are favored by 6.5 points at home. Point total is only 42. Biggest major injury fantasy-wise for this game, still Dak Prescott. As we mentioned, questionable with that right thumb injury. Tight end Dalton Schultz is good to go, but it does seem like, based on comments from Mike McCarthy earlier in the week, that it will still be Cooper Kupp starting for the Cowboys in this one.
So not directly fantasy relevant, but frankly, I think very fantasy relevant. Both left tackle Jordan Mailata and center Jason Kelce were at practice today for the Philadelphia Eagles. Some massive returns for them, two of the better players of their position. And obviously this Cowboys defensive line has been, game wrecking so far this season. We talked a little bit about them on Thursday with Seth Galina. The Cowboys run the most stunts in the NFL. They do a lot of exotic things up front, trying to throw offensive lines off. And when you have a guy like Jason Kelce, one of the best centers in the NFL, a veteran, a guy who has seen everything you could possibly throw at him, getting him back for this game is huge. So, I again kind of think 6.5 points for Dallas is probably too many. I'm not taking this one. Just because Philadelphia is a very, very good football team. But like you said, Dallas versus Philly, you're going to get this on prime time. Hopefully it lives up to the hype. I think it will.
Yeah, Greenline likes the Cowboys at plus 6.5. They also like, or a PFF Greenline, go to pff.com/betting/best bets, by the way. And they also like the over. And I kind of like the over in this game as well, just because obviously Dallas's defense has been very good. Eagles have a solid defense as well. But there's always that possibility that Trayvon Diggs can get burned, and Eagles have some very good wide receivers in this game. Jalen Hurts has been fantastic. Cowboys offense is not kept up quite as much, but it seems like kind of a low point total. And PFF Greenline agrees with me. So that's what's most important. Monday night game, Broncos at Chargers. Chargers favored by 4.5, point total 45.5. I don't think we've got the injury report for either one of these teams yet at this point, but as of Thursday, running backs Mike Boone and Melvin Gordon, both limited. Tight end Eric Saubert, limited. Quarterback Russell Wilson, limited, Mr. Limited, but he is expected to play in this game. And then you've got Chargers wide receiver Keenan Allen, limited. See if he can finally get back for this game. I didn't expect this to be this much of a lingering injury for Keenan Allen, but hamstring injuries can always be tricky. So like I mentioned, we're still waiting on that Friday injury report for this game, but we'll see what Keenan Allen can do.
When you sent over the list and it said Russell Wilson limited, I knew you weren't going to be able to resist on that one. I knew that was coming. Not that I blame you. Not that I blame
it wasn't
you
pre-planned, by the way, either.
Yeah, no, I believe you. Very organic, but just had to be done. Yeah, the thing with Keenan Allen is that he was close before last week, but then on Friday he left practice early with trainers, and I think I'm reading the tea leaves here. I'm not trying to break news. Not trying, don't kill me if I don't think he's playing. I really just the way the verbiage around how they're talking about him just strikes me as a guy who they're sick of. Let him get healthy, right? Just let him get fully healthy. I believe their bye comes up relatively soon, and so maybe that also is part of it as well. Yeah. So again, I'm not telling you, but I do not get the indication he's playing in this game.
That would make sense. Yeah, he's been. It has not been great for him over the last few weeks here. All right. Well, we have got. I think that we handled our best bet segment there pretty well throughout going through all those games. Anything else that you wanted to clear up for the week before this Sunday's games?
Yes, we have a question here from Currency, one of our commenters here, and I think it's a good one and one we maybe usually would address, but obviously Friday is more of our roundup in the games. I reached out to a couple people around the league about William Jackson when he basically, it sounds like, has essentially asked for a trade. They didn't officially say he made a trade request, but it sounds like he did. Yeah, the compensation is not expected to be a ton. He'd be owed, depending when he gets moved, about $3 million for this season. And then it's about, I want to say 11 or 12 or $13 million for next year. Not guaranteed, so kind of doesn't totally matter. But nevertheless, they said a couple teams probably would ask Cincinnati to maybe retain some of the money. They said Cincinnati would probably not want to do that, to a certain degree. But nevertheless, they said there is no chance it would be. Oh, go ahead.
The Commanders, you mean, rather than Cincinnati?
Oh, sorry. Oh, well, I'm thinking of his old team. My bad. Yes, the Commanders, who he plays for now. My apologies. Yeah, they said, Washington, they wouldn't really want to eat a lot of that money, maybe a little bit. But they said, nevertheless, a day 3 pick is all they would see here if and when he is moved.
Yeah, it's never a great sign that a trade gets to the point of being reported before it happens. Typically, if there's a major market for a player, if the team is happy with what is being offered for it, the trade just happens without this report coming out beforehand. But yeah, I think that obviously William Jackson is a good player, but it might be one of those trades where, the end result and what the Commanders actually wind up getting, getting in return for William Jackson could wind up surprising some people. But I think that will do it for today's show. Thank you everyone for tuning in. If you want to listen to us instead in the future, subscribe to the PFF Wire podcast on Apple or Spotify. Make sure to leave a review if you do that as well. Download the PFF app. Make sure to subscribe to PFF Plus. That is only $79.99 a year, and I believe you can still get a weekly free trial. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Throw me a follow at Doug Kyed, and we will be back with you guys again on Monday. And we're changing up the show a little bit. We've got some fun segments coming up for everyone, so make sure to watch for those as well.